So tonight's project is going to be a greeting card that we create using a watercolor and ink piece of art on this watercolor paper that we will then adhere to this greeting card that comes with a greeting card and an envelope. And just so you know, the greeting card is also watercolor paper. So if you are brave, you can paint right on here, but I would think most of us want to do this and stick it on just for safety. But I'll leave that up to you. So some of the information tonight we're going to use, you're going to come up with a phrase or saying or Bible verse, and we've given you some ideas on your handouts of things that you might be able to use or be inspired by. You do not have to use these. This is your piece of art. So if you have a favorite verse, go ahead and use that. I've also drawn some sample symbols, just kind of a few things to inspire you. Again, if you have your own symbol that's here, that's not here, that you want to use, religious or otherwise, feel free to use that. And then finally, there's a couple pages, and I'm sorry, mine are all in black and white, but yours are probably in color, of some of the ideas of putting the two together that are just sort of off the internet here. And these are really great ideas to kind of get you started, give you some ideas if you're not sure where to go in the time that we have. So first, let's see, let's go over the materials. So we talked about the paper. It's going to be a small piece of paper. It might be slightly different shape. You will have two brushes. You have one that's more of a wash flat brush and one that's more of a round brush for doing more details. And mine are kind of old and used, but yours are probably nice and new. Let's see. And then we'll have a pen. You'll have a different brand than this. I'm doing this at home, but a watercolor, waterproof pen so that you'll be able to draw your things first and the watercolor will not disturb them. So let's get started. Okay, so you might feel more comfortable starting this project with your pencil. If you do want to sketch what you're doing with a pencil, I've kind of started here with my wording, I would recommend not erasing. This is kind of an old eraser, but these red ones tend to leave a mark, and it's better if you just draw really lightly and go ahead and just do your artwork over it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll put a little sun here, or at least the circle for a sun. And then you want to use the waterproof black ink to put your design on the piece first before you paint. And the reason we want to do that is the paint is going to make the paper wet, and so that makes it really hard to use this. But if this goes on first, I'm just going to make a little sun, and I'm going to write my words. If you can see in the video, I can still see the pencil here, but that's totally fine. And you can do your words any style that you want. So, and now it's time to paint, the fun part, the color part. So we have different colors here, and I want to talk about these, and I'm not sure how well they show. My light bar over here, it's not the greatest lighting in my studio for this kind of thing. Tonight you should have a yellow, a red that's a little more towards the orangey side. This is a cadmium red. Another red that's a little more towards the pink or the cooler side of the spectrum. A blue, we can't still see this too well on the video, but a blue that's a little warmer, meaning it's a little more towards the purple color. And then another blue that's more cool, a little bit more like a turquoise. So those are I believe, the six colors that we're going to have tonight. And I'll try to do enough here that you can kind of see how they might mix. So first, let's start off with, if you're not familiar with watercolor, just some different techniques. And the first one is called wet on wet. And I've got my water here. I've got my, let's see, put this over here so you can see it. On that side, there you go. Because this piece is so small, I'm going to recommend we don't go overboard with the water, because what happens with watercolor is it follows the water. And if you've got a lot of water, it's just going to dilute it all and it's going to go everywhere. So, you might even wipe your brush off a little bit and just kind of test it out. But I'm going to just wet my paper, and this is just one of the techniques. You can do it all dry brush, but this is a wet on wet technique that starts with a wet paper. And then when I put the paint into it, I'm going to use my smaller brush here. When I put my paint into it, not going to use too much water with my color. I don't want to dilute that either. But when I put my paint in, you can see how it runs and gets really loose. That's because the wet paint is going into the wet water. So that was more of my uh, warmer red, or orangey red, and I did mix some yellow in, and that was sort of a last minute choice because I didn't think the yellow would show up enough for this. But let's take some pure yellow now. And again, the paper's still wet, so it's going to kind of push into that first color. You can see that edge is really soft. That's because it's wet. And it's kind of making this funny fan color. And, you know, watercolor is all about controlling the water. We're not going to get it all right tonight, but I just think it's kind of interesting when it does things like that. Let's see. Let's go to the next pink or blue. Pink or red. Now, the reason I put this one in the palette, and yours might not be quite as pink as mine, I've got this crazy color here, is that if I try to mix purple, which might be the next in line here, if I use this red, it's going to come out muddy and brown. But if I mix it with this one, with this bluer blue that we've got here, it's going to be a much nicer purple. Let's see what happens here if they actually mix themselves. They may not be. Oops, and they may have too much water going on. So now I think I'm going to take a little bit of I kind of wipe my brush off a bit. Let's see if I can kind of blend them a little on the paper and cheat. You can see it's turning a little purple. Usually I mix the paint and then apply it, but you know, I like to just make it up when I'm doing a video, like I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so that's one way to paint wet on wet. Another way to paint would be to have dry brush, kind of wet on dry. So let's do, let's just go back to this red. We'll do our sun in a red. Now this time you notice I did not put any water before on the sun area. So this is dry. So now when I put my paint on, it's going to have a really hard edge. It's not going to get soft. So that's a whole nother just look that you can acquire by just not using water. Now if I had enough water in this yellow and I touch this red, it should dilute it a bit. Yeah, you can see it's sort of turning orange around there and softening that edge. So you can go back in and soften things. You can also go back in, let me put a little more color up here. I'm going to go do this sort of more turquoisey blue up here. Fill out my little sky area. If I let this dry a little bit, I'm going to now dry off my brush so it's pretty dry. And I can actually pick up color right out of there. So you can see I'm kind of pulling the color out. It's making kind of a white line. That's one of the ways. You can't really erase in watercolor, but that's kind of one of the ways you can pull out some color if you need to. Oops. You have to keep cleaning your brush just to make sure it stays clean. It's pulling paint out versus putting it in. So that's something you can do with watercolor. You can also let's mix up some green. If I want to do green, obviously it's going to have some yellow. I'm going to put this right here. And then I would not recommend using that bluer, purpley blue, because it's going to make more of a brown green. For a cleaner green, you're going to want to use some of this turquoise color to get this nice green color. And you can just use the paintbrush to make like textures and lines and just different things that interest you without having to get all mushy about it. So just gives you a different look that you can do different things with. And of course, if you change your mind later, I tend to use this shape brush more often myself. But you can go in and you can soften some edges. Softening a little bit there, that green, you can kind of see that as it trades out takes some of the white paper away. You can also go back over it with maybe something darker and See how that happens. Now, one thing, I'm getting my fingerprints. There's some technique there. Get your fingerprints in the sky. Now, one thing I will say is if you want to do something that's hard edged or even very dry brush where you see some texture, let me get some maybe blue that's really dry here. You see the texture of the brush a lot. Your paper needs to be dry. So you may not be able to do it over here where the paper might be still wet. Mine's kind of drying pretty quickly. It's a warm day here. But you do need to wait for this to dry before you can do any dry brush technique. And then if you do want to add more wet, you've got to be careful about picking up the art, but you can put it over, but you don't want to go too many times because it's going to start picking up the paint. So it's all about the water. It's a little bit experimental, but just really have fun with it. And then when we're done with this, we're going to kind of let them dry, maybe fan them around a bit. And then you'll be able to put this on your card and have a really beautiful card to take home. So have fun. I can't wait to see what everyone makes.